All right, so we will jump right into the text. There's only a few things that I want to talk about. What I want to do mostly is I want to relay another story to you, which I think I mentioned last time, which puts in more concrete terms what you find in these chapters in book 6. The role of injustice. We typically take injustice to be something that is seen as a departure from fulfillment, from happiness. Remember, the point of ethics is happiness. And injustice is to see your life having come to come to an end. You've cut yourself off. Remember, we talk about the whole and the parts of the whole, and injustice is to have like an integrated life of like a well-working whole. To be unjust is to cut yourself off from life, from a well-ordered life, and it seems like that is just going to lead to destruction. It's just going to lead to unhappiness, and in a way, that's true. It is going to lead to unhappiness. The question we've been talking about is how do you go from the experience of being unjust to being brought back in and made whole? It's a type of regeneration. How do you get, I don't know, you could put it in sort of quasi-evangelical terms, but how do you get reborn? How do you get rejustified, right? We talk about like justification in theological context. Like how do you get brought back into completeness, into wholeness, once you found yourself already having been dead? Right? Does that make sense? And once you've come to identify yourself as a sinner or as unjust or whatever, it's as if you're dead. There's no hope, right? You're already the only way you could get back into the hole is if you were already just, but you've proven yourself unjust. So how do you do that? And this is what I think is happening in book 6, and it comes interestingly through the experience of we'll just put it as the experience of death, or the life of the unjust person is something that, for Dostoevsky, can be fruitful. And you think, how can it be fruitful? How can living an unjust life be a fruitful life? Now, this is hard to get in the abstract, and so it's best seen through actual concrete experiences that will give an interpretation of how we should think of that. Okay, so here's ultimately what I mean. You have someone like the mysterious visitor. So go back to the mysterious visitor, who is the paradigm of rebellion. And the reason the mysterious visitor is a paradigm of like rebellion in Ivan's Rebellion is because you have this world, which is the world of the sticky little leaves, as Ivan puts it, and the sun and the birds. Everything is going well. Everything is being obedient to the divine plan. Everything is doing what it ought to do. Everything is just. Everything is right. There's sort of like a harmony in creation, except for me. It's as if everything is saying yes to its existence and to the plan, the order that's been given, except for me. I'm the one that's saying no. I'm the one that's kind of, I'm the one committing the rebellion in relation to all of the all of creation. Nothing else can sin. Nothing else can rebel other than the human. Does Does that sort of make, so the human has this like interesting sense that he can isolate himself from the whole, right? He can remove himself from the whole. And once he does that, he doesn't think that it's so bad until he experiences the real death that living that type of life amounts to. So some people say things like this to their kids. They say this to their kids. Although I've never said this to my kids yet, but maybe I will someday. Like, it's a really bad idea to start using cocaine. Don't use cocaine. You'll get addicted. It's going to ruin your life. You'll be unhappy. Very bad things will come if you start using cocaine. Okay. And then the kid, maybe they're like a high school kid, 20-year-old or something, they're like, okay, Dad, you're right. And it's as if they don't really believe that becoming addicted to cocaine is going to really be a life that's not worth living. Does that make sense? Like, they hear people say it, but they don't really believe it. How do you really come to believe that a life addicted to cocaine is not worth living? I'm not recommending you do this.
Either see it in someone you love or experience it yourself.
Yeah, somehow you experience it, and or something akin to it, right? You can say like the difference between like cocaine and meth. Yeah, maybe there's differences, but there's something similar, such that you could see something analogous to that type of life that really is one that is more of like a living dead person. And people that live such a life often find that it's not really any life at all. There's nothing really deep in that life that is worth living. And to be unjust is to have a life that's on its destruction. It's basically a life that's leading to death. Or another way of putting it, actually, it's a more paradoxical way, is it's a life that is death. It's a lived death. The life of injustice or the life of sin or whatever you want to call it. It's like a living of death. And that you don't perhaps experience that at first, but it takes a little bit of time and for it to kind of seep into all areas of your life. And I think what happens is it can get to the point where you just get life becomes so empty. Existence becomes so empty. There's not much that's worth living for. And you realize, and this is I think something Dostoevsky himself was really troubled by, is you come to this realization that it would be better not to live. I've merited a life such that it would be better not to live this life. And that's a really, I don't want to say, that's a very, I want to pick the right word, terrible place to be. Because you realize that the life that you've chosen for yourself is one that is death, and it's not tolerable. You can't live it, and it's a terrible place because it's accompanied by a lot of suffering, a lot of internal suffering. Now, there's external suffering that comes from, being addicted to various narcotics and other types of unhealthy behavior. There's other suffering, physical suffering, but I think what Dostoevsky and the whole kind of spiritual tradition recognizes, it's really the psychological suffering, the spiritual suffering, the moral suffering, the internal suffering is what really torments people. It's oftentimes not the physical pain that leads people to commit suicide, it's the psychological pain, it's the moral pain, the spiritual pain. And that's the thing that I think what Dostoevsky is saying is, this type of life is the one that's going to generate a type of suffering that is intolerable. You can't bear it. Does that make sense? And you lose, I think what he's trying to say is you lose almost all hope in life And it's terrible to have that experience. But is it good to have that experience? Now this is the real. This is why I think this novel's worth reading many times, because what he's trying to say is it's the most painful thing you could ever experience. But I'll put it. You have a lack of hope once you've experienced life like this. Right? But why would this be good? Ultimately, because it reveals to you that the only thing that could be worth living is some other life, right? Or perhaps, and then this is where freedom kicks in, or no life at all, right? But at the very least, anything is better than the life that I've merited for myself. Anything is better than living in injustice. Because that's a type of suffering, ultimately, when it is carried out to its completion, it might take 10 years, might take 15, might take 30 years. It might take until you're 70. But it's a life that you can come to this realization of it's not really worth living. And that's not in the abstract, like the life of sin's a bad life. It's like internally, I recognize that I just don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want this life that I have. And to experience that is a type of desperation that is really, it's like you're drowning and you recognize the air is gone. And so it's as if it's the experience of dying. You're dying. You really are dying. Here's why this can be good. Because once you found yourself completely dead, this is like just Paul in like modern existentialist literature. Once you found yourself completely dead in sin, it's possible, it's not necessitated, but it's possible to have a new life, right? Like if you're completely willing to let go of your entire old life, it becomes possible to have a new life. Does that make sense? Now, what does it look like to have a new life? Or how do you move from, once you hit, we'll call it rock bottom, right? Right. Once you hit that, it's as if you don't care if you die, right? In the physical sense, it's like I don't care if I die in the physical sense, because that, in some sense, might be better than the suffering I'm having right now. Now, it's not the same as like wanting to kill yourself, right? So it's not the same as like suicide, but it's this recognition that the life of sin, the wages of sin really is death. And if you're like to do a trade-off, death might be better than living in sin. And to really experience that, I think Dostoevsky's saying is a glorious yet terrible place to be, because it's at like the dawn, right? It's right at the dawn. And what can happen is you can just completely become insane, in the best possible sense insane, that you completely let go of yourself and what people think of you and any fears that you might have about how things go. All of these things that you used to think were so important, it's out the window now. Like because in a way you've let all of that go. Does that, kind of what I'm talking about? I'll give one example, which I've talked to some people about this. This is an interesting phenomenon. So, does anyone know anyone that's sort of been like this? You don't have to say who. It's just that's really gone down to the depths. And sometimes this is the tragedy in human life is sometimes people lose hope and then they don't find a new hope. But for people that do find a new hope, it's as if they become like really interesting, weird people. I've known people like this, weird people. Meaning, here they are, they're 60 years old. There's this really bizarre, wonderful phenomenon in the world, modern world, called Alcoholics Anonymous. And the really interesting thing about this is you have all these people, that they're united precisely in this experience, right? How many people have read Crime and Punishment? Yeah, you should read Crime and Punishment. It's such a good novel. The main character is a drunkard, and he kind of talks a lot about this in the context of like being a drunkard. But anyway, the idea is that you have all these people that what brings them here is this complete sense of their life is destroyed. They've completely destroyed their life. Everything about their life is ruined. They understand all of the harm they've done people and all that. And what happens, maybe not necessarily, but what can happen is these people, once they've completely died in this way, they have this possibility of saying, maybe if I go and I apologize to that person that I really hurt, that I really abused, really mistreated when I was 19 and now here I am 65, maybe I'll see if I can track them down, call them up. They're going to think that I'm a monster, but maybe there's some sort of meaning in being able to apologize, being able to actually be humble, and so they find themselves making this. This is one of the things that is sort of central in this is you make a list in this program. Make a list of all the people that you've ever harmed. This is good homework. If I gave homework, you do this. I recommend you do this. Try to make a list of everyone that you can remember that you've ever hurt or harmed. So go to a long list. Write it out on paper, and then try to consider whether or not you would be able to go and make up for that, make good on those harms, right? And now, typically, because a lot of us have a sense of pride, we know we've hurt people. But it takes a lot of humility to go and to die to your sin, right? You know you did it, but you don't want to die to it. You don't want to let it go. And this is the thing that I think is really miraculous about this situation, which is the situation the mysterious visitor ultimately got to, which is nothing is worse than what I have now. Nothing that people will think about me, nothing that yada, 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 right? And once you hit that, it's just up. That's all you have to go from, right? And I think this is what we'll put it like this: the grace of the crucifixion is that type of death that you experience here is an experience of love. It's a gift. It's something that's been given to you because it becomes now something that can be used, right, for regeneration. It becomes the very first moment of a rebirth, such that you can let go of yourself. You can let go of we'll just say you can let go of yourself. You can finally not live for yourself. And that would be the return to justice, is you recognize to be unjust is to live for yourself, right? I don't need these people. You cut yourself off and you live for yourself. And you recognize living for yourself is actually death. You're trying to find yourself in the gospel terminology, but in finding yourself, you lose yourself. And the only way to be brought back is to recognize that you have lost yourself, which opens you up to being able to live for another, right? To actually be willing to die, because even dying for another would be better than living for myself. And then it becomes this really great, this really wonderful grace that comes through the experience of the death wrought by sin. I mean, we're talking about sin. You can substitute injustice. It's in philosophical terms, you can call it injustice, right? It's cutting yourself off from the good, turning away, rebellion from the good, however you wanted to put it. So the experience of that is the experience of death, but the experience of death is the clearing. It's getting yourself out of the way. Like, how can you return to the good? Well, you have to get yourself out of the way. How do you get yourself out of the way? Well, you got to die to yourself. You're going to really have to recognize that your life in your hands is not any life at all. And once you hit that, then you realize the only way to find a life is to put it in someone else's hands, because you can't live unto yourself. Okay, and, I don't know. Does that make sense? Questions, comments, thoughts? I didn't even read about Mary of Egypt. Oh no! Oh, I got carried away. I knew this would happen. I have 4 minutes. 3 minutes. That's fast. How many people know about Mary of Egypt? Let me read some of this. This was a desert mother. Did I tell you about Mary of Egypt in the broad context? Okay. So there was this guy. This is about the life of Mary of Egypt. There was this priest. His name was Zossima. And Zossima, I'm not making this up, the life of Mary of Egypt. Zossima goes out into the desert and meets this woman. He doesn't know she's a woman, but finds out eventually that she's a woman. Who's been living in this desert for a long time. And I'll send this to you so you can read it to yourself. But what she says about her life when Zossima says, "Tell me about your life," is this. And I'll just read you the start of it. If I can find the start of it. I am ashamed, Abba, to speak to you of my disgraceful life. Forgive me for God's sake. But as you have already seen my naked body, because she's been living in the desert for like 50 years and all of her clothes disintegrated. And she's in the desert in the 4th century or 5th century or whatever, so you can't just Amazon some new clothes out into the Egyptian desert. I shall likewise lay bare before you my work, so that you may know with what shame and obscenity my soul is filled. I was not running away out of vanity from you, because she tried to run from him. No, but basically it was because she goes on to say, because I was afraid that if you heard about my life, you would run from me, right? And she goes to tell her story. My native land, Holy Father, was Egypt. Already during the lifetime of my parents, when I was 12 years old, I renounced their love and went to Alexandria. I am ashamed to recall how there I've at first ruined my maidenhood, basically means she's no longer a virgin, and then unrestrainedly and insatiably gave myself up to sensuality. It is more becoming to speak of this briefly, so that you may just know my passion and lechery. For about 17 years, forgive me, I lived like that. It was like a fire of public debauch, and it was not for the sake of gain. And she basically goes on to say, no, I lived like a prostitute, not because I wanted to get money, but because I just loved the fact that people were ruining their lives with me. And then she eventually sees this group of, give me the Spark Notes version. She sees this group of pilgrims getting on this boat, going to the feast of the exaltation of the cross, and to Jerusalem. And so she gets on the boat because she knows these people are going to be on the boat for a long time. They're going to get bored, good clientele. And so she gets on board to go to this pilgrimage to the exaltation of the Holy Cross, basically without any intention of anything holy, right? And eventually she gets there, this big crowd goes into this church, and she's like, oh, I wonder what's going on. She joins the crowd, goes in the church, but she can't go in the church, she's restrained. Long story short, she has this really intense recognition of the weight of her life and the sinfulness of her life, completely breaks down, runs to this church on the River Jordan, gets baptized, and then immediately heads out to the desert and spends the rest of her life in the desert. And then I'll finish it up right now. And then the last thing about this that's interesting, if you read this, I'll send it to you, is incredible. She says, it's not because I think that I'm really worthy that gives me the strength to stay out in the desert. Look at all the hard work I've done. I should be able to continue to do this because I've lived out here so long and I've really made myself awesome. It's that every time she has the slightest tendency to think about the wine she used to drink, she remembers this experience, right? This is what the taste of wine ultimately tastes like. This is what the pursuit of sensuality ultimately tastes like. And so it's her complete comprehension of the life of injustice and having experienced that, which is what allows her to persist 50, 60 years, I forget how long it is, in the desert. I mean, it's a really observant way that it's the weight of sin which gives perseverance in the life of the sinner. To really understand the weight, and then ultimately this is then the mercy of God, right? It's both of those going hand in hand, because this, without the mercy of God, would just completely lead to collapse. You couldn't live at all with understanding that, and then life can only come with the recognition of one having already shared in that with you, and that's what the crucifixion is. Okay, so we'll see you on